You ever seen a man lose all credibility on live TV? Not just get proven wrong, but completely exposed by his own coworker, because that's exactly what just happened to Jason Lloyd. This wasn't your usual sports debate. This was public demolition. One minute, Jason was confidently trashing Shedeur Sanders, calling him the worst quarterback of the modern era. Worse than Marcus Russell. Worse than Johnny Manziel. Worse than anybody. The next minute, silence. Stammering. The whole thing fell apart. Live on air. Why? Because Garrett Bush stepped in with something Jason wasn't ready for: receipts, real numbers, real comparisons, and one question Jason Lloyd couldn't answer. That's all it took to crack open the whole charade. Because this wasn't just about one bad quarterback take, this was about how far some people will stretch a narrative when they've already decided the storyline. And what happens when someone finally calls them out. From twisted statistics to anonymous sources, this wasn't football analysis. It was a hit job, and it backfired live and unfiltered. Stick around, because once you see how easily this hype collapsed under pressure, you'll never trust lazy narratives the same way again. At first glance, Jason Lloyd is supposed to be one of the insiders. A Cleveland Browns reporter with years of experience, a respected voice on local sports panels, and someone fans are supposed to trust when it comes to behind-the-scenes insight from the team. When Jason steps on screen, people expect inside scoops, not wild agendas. But what he delivered about Shedeur Sanders wasn't analysis. It was an ambush. On live air, Jason went for maximum shock value. No build-up, no nuance. He straight up said Shedeur Sanders might be the worst quarterback of the modern era. Let that sink in. Not struggling. Not still developing. The worst. Worse than Marcus Russell, worse than Johnny Manziel, worse than Brandon Weeden, Deshaun Kaiser, Charlie Fry, the Mount Rushmore of legendary draft busts. And this wasn't some off-the-cuff frustration from a fan. Jason delivered it like a closing argument, with a calm voice, polished confidence, and a claim that he had confirmation from people inside the building. The implication? That this wasn't just his opinion, but some hidden truth passed around NFL circles. He doesn't know what he's looking at, he can't flip protections, he only throws to wide-open receivers. It sounded absolute, like an undeniable fact. But then, he kept going. Jason pulled out a stat he said proved everything. One stat he claimed that tied it all together and made the case airtight: EPA, expected points added. He said the number painted a clear picture. Shedeur wasn't just bad, he was the worst, full stop. He's dead last, Jason said. EPA shows it. He's at the very bottom, worse than Russell, Manziel, everybody. But here's the problem. When you throw out a massive accusation like that, you'd better show your math. And Jason didn't. No breakdown of what the number actually meant. No explanation of how EPA works. No acknowledgement of any context, no mention of the rookie learning curve, the injuries, the offensive line breaking down, or the reality that Shedeur was drafted in the 5th round and thrust into the starting role way ahead of schedule. He delivered the stat like it was holy scripture. But as we'll see in a moment, it quickly turned into the weakest pillar in a collapsing argument. And here's what made it worse. When faced with pushback, he tried to disappear into anonymity. Jason said the harshest criticisms weren't from him, they were from people inside the building. No names, just whispers, another faceless source. That's one of the oldest tricks in the media playbook. If you say something controversial, but it blows up in your face, you can quietly point and say, "Hey, I didn't really say that, I'm just passing along what I heard." But that doesn't fly when the accusation is this serious. This wasn't just performance critique, it was a full-blown attack on competence, intelligence, and football IQ. Jason wasn't just saying Shedeur needed time to grow. He was implying the dude didn't even know where the blitz was coming from, couldn't adjust, didn't belong. That's the kind of claim that can ruin careers if believed. And what makes it worse? There was no accountability. No acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, a rookie deserves time to develop. No willingness to compare Shedeur to other rookies facing the same situations. Instead, Jason reached decades into the past, ignored everyone Shedeur actually should be measured against, and tried to write his entire NFL story after 5 games. That's not analysis. That's narrative. But here's where the downfall begins. Because Garrett Bush wasn't having it. He saw what was happening, saw the manipulation in real time, and waited until Lloyd finished his rant before calmly leaning in and asking a question Jason wasn't ready for. What's the stat? EPA? What does it mean? Who's at the top of the list? Who's at the bottom? It was surgical. And Jason froze, no specific numbers, no chart. He didn't even have it written down. Just a vague backpedal where he basically said, well, the people at the bottom are the bad ones and the top ones are, the good ones. That was it. A flimsy attempt to sound informed, crumbling under the weight of one basic follow-up. And just like that, the entire story began to fall apart. Because Garrett Bush wasn't just defending Shedeur Sanders. He was defending objectivity, reality, the integrity of actual sports analysis. And suddenly, the insider didn't look very insider at all. What Jason Lloyd did wasn't just criticize a player. He tried to bury him with no receipts, no accountability, and no real understanding of the numbers he was using. And it blew up in his face. But here's the kicker, this was only the beginning of the collapse. What came next? Stats, tape, real comparisons, context. Everything Jason didn't want to answer for got dragged into the light. And the moment that happened, there was nowhere left for his argument to hide. Every great takedown starts with one moment. That instant when confidence turns to confusion, when the person on the offensive realizes they just stepped into something they can't explain. For Jason Lloyd, it happened the second Garrett Bush leaned forward and asked the one question he didn't want to hear. What exactly is this stat? EPA? What's it mean? Who's using it? Where are you getting these numbers from? Dead silence. You could actually feel the tension shift in the room. That split second where Jason realized that he wasn't debating someone who was going to shout back at him or get emotional. He was talking to a man who came prepared, who understood the game, and who knew when something smelled off. Garrett Bush wasn't just reacting, he was calculating. Bush had listened to everything. The character jabs, the lazy comparisons, the statistical heat with no substance. And instead of going straight into anger or defense, he aimed for something way more destructive, the truth. Jason Lloyd tried throwing around expected points, added EPA like it was a magic wand. A single stat that could settle the argument once and for all. He acted like the number explained everything wrong with Shedeur Sanders, as if EPA was so flawless it didn't need explanation. But Garrett Bush did something most people in the media space don't do anymore. He asked for facts, not feelings. If you're going to build your entire argument on EPA, then explain where that data comes from. Who developed it? Why is it relevant here? And why should anyone accept it without context, especially when we've seen actual production on the field? Jason's response? A soft shrug, a stammer, a vague sentence about it being a new stat and the guys at the top being who you'd expect. That's it. He didn't even have the numbers written down. Suddenly, the stat that was supposed to be the foundation for his entire argument looked more like a poorly rehearsed soundbite. This wasn't film room analysis. It was a guy scrolling through his phone before airtime, looking for something that sounded smart but couldn't be defended. And it got worse. Jason defended his use of the data by pointing out that the bottom of the EPA rankings, supposedly, is where Shedeur sits. But as Garrett Bush pointed out instantly, that only matters if you're comparing apples to apples. Not rookies to 10-year flops. Not fifth-round projects to first overall busts from a different era. Context is everything. That was the word that Jason Lloyd never brought to the table, context. It's the most important part of football analysis, especially when you're evaluating a rookie quarterback thrown into NFL games midseason behind a shaky offensive line. Yet Jason ignored it completely. He skipped over the development curve. He ignored the system. He pretended like Shedeur's throwing for 350 yards in a pro game meant nothing, simply because one stat told a different story. Bush broke that right down. If Shedeur throws for 360 yards and 3 touchdowns, numbers only Joe Flacco hit all season for this team, and EPA still says he's the worst QB ever. Maybe the problem isn't the quarterback. Maybe the problem is how you're using the numbers. Boom. In one moment, Garrett Bush flipped the entire segment upside down. Jason Lloyd came into the discussion thinking he was setting the terms. He had a stat. He had a list of names. He had a predetermined conclusion. But Bush exposed it for what it was, a lazy narrative with no backbone. Even worse, Jason refused to compare Shedeur to quarterbacks in the same rookie class. Guys like Jackson Dart, who once threw 32 passing yards in an entire game. Cam Ward, highly praised, but putting up pedestrian numbers. Tyler Show, another rookie with far from perfect film. All dealing with the same rookie speed, the same NFL leap, the same learning curve. But Jason didn't want to talk about them. The moment Bush brought those names up, "We're not talking about those guys," Jason shot back. And that's when you knew everything Jason Lloyd built this take on was engineered to make Shedeur look uniquely bad. No comparisons, no data sets, no consistency, just one name being dragged while everyone else got a pass. Bush pointed it out immediately. It's called a data set. You can't compare someone to NFL busts from 20 years ago while refusing to compare him to the players drafted the same time. You're just cherry-picking to force an outcome. That's not objective. That's an agenda, and he's right. There's a phrase for this in courtroom cross-examinations, moving the goalposts. And Jason was doing it live in real time without even realizing how obvious it looked. He ignored offensive line weaknesses. He ignored scheme fit. He ignored game tape showing Shedeur reading defenses, flipping protections, pointing out blitzes, making sideline throws, and giving his team a chance to win. Instead, he reached for a single metric and a bunch of drama, then panicked when it didn't hold up under questioning. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was an unraveling, and Jason Lloyd couldn't stop it. Because once the truth starts leaking and narratives crumble fast, what we were watching wasn't just one analyst getting fact-checked. It was the blueprint for how media narratives fall apart when someone finally demands clarity. And this collapse, we're only halfway through. When someone's backed into a corner during an argument, they usually do one of two things. They admit they may have gone too far, or they double down and pray no one asks follow-up questions. Jason Lloyd chose door number 2, and that's exactly where things went from embarrassing to exposed. With his argument already wobbling, Jason reached for the one thing he thought would protect him: EPA, expected points added. It sounds official, complex, like something baked in football laboratories using next-gen data only the most elite insiders understand. But Garrett Bush wasn't impressed. He's seen this play before, and he called it out for what it was: a weaponized stat being twisted to fit a lazy narrative. And unfortunately for Jason, this time the numbers didn't save him. They exposed him even more. So, what is EPA, really? EPA, or expected points added, is a metric designed to measure how much a player contributes positively or negatively to the expected. Here's the catch: like all advanced stats, EPA is highly sensitive to external factors. Offensive line play, scheme effectiveness, drops, injuries, weather, coaching. Even receiver spacing and route design can wildly skew the number, which is exactly what Garrett Bush latched onto. He broke it down in plain English. You're trying to use EPA like it's a final verdict, like you put it in the machine and it spits out the truth. But EPA can't tell you why a play failed. It just knows it failed. That's not enough when you're trying to label someone the worst QB of the modern era. And here's why that's crucial. Let's look at context. Shedeur Sanders has been dropped into the NFL meat grinder as a fifth-round rookie, behind a below-average offensive line, with inconsistent receiver separation, and still managed to throw for over 360 yards and 3 touchdowns in a single game. He led the Browns in rushing 3 weeks in a row. He kept Cleveland in games they had no business being in. And his presence on the field sparked better production than the team saw with veterans like Joe Flacco running the show. How do you square that with a stat that supposedly labels him worse than Marcus Russell? Simple. You can't, unless you ignore everything else. Jason Lloyd did bring context, just confidence. What made Jason Lloyd's argument crash so hard wasn't just the weakness of the EPA stat. It was how confidently he delivered it, with zero explanation. He didn't define the stat, properly compare EPA across other rookies, explain who calculates it, or how it's used in proper scouting show, where top-tier QBs rank versus raw rookies. He just said the number supports the take, and expected the audience to take his word for it. That's not analysis. That's performance. Bush called it out instantly. You can't roll into a live segment throwing around stats off your phone, claim somebody's the worst of an entire era, and have nothing written down, no sources, no backup, no real side-by-side data. That's not real. That's not fair. And that ain't how you talk football. Jason looked shocked, and the audience felt it too. In that moment, every vague source, every aggressive insult, every stretch of logic behind his hot take, it all started to unravel right there on camera. You want to use stats? Fine, let's compare. Bush flipped the script again by doing what Jason refused to do, actually lay out fair comparisons. He brought up Jackson Dart. He brought up Tyler Show, Cam Ward, quarterbacks from the same draft class, playing in similar circumstances, facing the same rookie struggles in real time. Jason's response? Why are we talking about those guys? That was it. Think about what that response actually says. It says, I'm not interested in comparing Shedeur to his real peers. I'm only focused on comparing him to quarterbacks from completely different generations who were drafted first overall, given starting roles immediately, and flamed out after multiple seasons. That's called shifting the goalpost, a strategy used to manipulate perception, not uncover the truth. Because if you stacked Shedeur next to guys in his class dealing with the same setbacks, suddenly he doesn't look like a failure. He looks pretty typical. In some cases, maybe watches the tape. And if you watch Shedeur Sanders on film, you'll see pre-snap adjustments, blitz pickup, reads off schedule throws under pressure, pocket presence that's far more advanced than most rookies' real production in critical moments. That's not someone completely lost, like Jason described. That's someone adjusting at the pro level faster than most fifth-rounders ever do. The idea that EPA was supposed to nullify all of that, it just doesn't hold up. The bigger message, you can't build truth off one stat. That's what this whole segment exposed, and why people are still talking about it days later. Jason Lloyd tried to build an empire off a single stat, but without full context, without side-by-side comparisons, without explaining the flaws in the metric itself. It wasn't an argument. It was a shortcut. And shortcuts don't hold up in front of someone like Garrett Bush, who came with film, facts, and old-school football logic. This moment showed what happens when you use advanced stats irresponsibly. They go from helpful tools to smoke screens covering weak takes. And when someone as sharp as Bush forces the smoke to clear, the truth is all that's left. If there was ever a moment that stripped the mask off modern sports commentary, this was it. Because the stats, the loud accusations, the empty comparisons, those were just symptoms. The real issue. A double standard that's so baked into the coverage, most people don't even notice it until someone like Garrett Bush drags it into the light. That's what he did. Not just defend Shedeur Sanders, everyone else does. Guys like Jackson Dart can have a 32-yard passing game, and no one flinches. Cam Ward can post average numbers all year and still be framed as a promising prospect. But when Shedeur, playing behind a weak offensive line with limited reps and fifth-round expectations, throws an incompletion or takes a sack, the reaction is he's growing. It's he doesn't belong. Jason Lloyd didn't want to compare Shedeur to those quarterbacks for a reason. He knew it would blow up his argument. That's why the moment Bush brought them up, he immediately dismissed it. We're not talking about those guys. But why not? They're from the same class. Some quarterbacks get patience, others get painted as lost causes. That's not analysis, it's an agenda. Garrett Bush called this out perfectly. He pointed out that when you build your entire take on an assumption that a guy like Shedeur just isn't built for the NFL, then you're not scouting, you're not evaluating. You're just looking for any data point to make the story stick. And if a rookie throws for over 350 yards in a game and you're still calling him the worst quarterback in modern history, that's not honesty. That's targeted. The harshest twist is that Shedeur has done things most other rookies haven't. He doesn't just flash raw talent, he's demonstrated command at the line of scrimmage, diagnosed defenses, shifted protections, thrown into tight windows, and adjusted to live bullets in real time. And yet, when errors pile up, as they should for any rookie, he doesn't get grace. He gets headlines calling for his replacement. It's not just bad analysis, it's damaging. Because it feeds into a long-standing history in football where certain players, especially black quarterbacks, are framed through a different lens. One mistake becomes a referendum on football IQ. One misread gets dragged into character assassination. And if you don't think that history is hanging over the Shedeur conversation, look closer at how Jason Lloyd framed him. Doesn't know what he's looking at. Can't see pressure. Only throws to wide-open guys. That's not performance critique. That's painting someone like they don't even speak the language of the league. Meanwhile, no mention of the broken offensive line, no chart of how often he's under pressure, no breakdown of timing and route spacing, just attacks on his basic competence with zero acknowledgement of what he's done well. When Shedeur delivers, it's ignored. When he struggles, it's used against him. Every single time. Garrett Bush made that bias impossible to ignore. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't flustered. He was calm, surgical, and dead on. When he asked Jason why he's more impressed with Dante Moore's college tape at Oregon over what Shedeur's already shown in 5 NFL games, Jason had nothing. No tape breakdown, no performance-based reason, just a gut feeling. And gut feelings, when left unchecked, become bias dressed up as opinion. That's what got exposed. Because as Bush pointed out, Dante Moore couldn't even win the starting job over Dylan Gabriel, someone who couldn't stick in the NFL. Yet, there's buzz around Moore as a potential Browns target, while the guy already producing in the NFL gets written off as a bust. That doesn't make sense on any level, unless it's not about football in the first place. And the truth is, Shedeur Sanders doesn't need defenders who deny his flaws. He needs coverage that treats him the same way it treats everybody else. That's all Bush was asking. When Cam Ward tosses up a dud, it's chalked up to learning. When Jackson Dart misses reads, people pull out the all-22 to show how he almost got it. But with Shedeur, there's no almost. There's no curiosity, just conclusions. Jason Lloyd didn't get exposed because he had a hot take. He got exposed because he treated that take like gospel without ever doing the work to prove it. He gave no context, ignored real comparisons, and weaponized a stat he barely understood, all to drag down one player who didn't fit the script he came in wanting to sell. And what Garrett Bush did wasn't just valuable for the moment. It was important for the culture, for media, for honesty in sports storytelling. Because someone finally said, out loud, what many fans already felt. The standard isn't being applied equally, and when it's not, the players suffer while the critics walk away unbothered. Not this time. Jason Lloyd didn't just lose an argument. He got caught defending a castle made of numbers with no foundation, and one question was all it took for the whole thing to come crashing down. The wildest part of all of this, nobody needed to defend Shedeur Sanders with opinions. The film has been speaking for weeks, loud and clear. While the media's been tossing around narratives like confetti, Shedeur's been delivering measurable, undeniable results on the field. And not just in flashes, in real, high-leverage moments under real NFL pressure. Garrett Bush tapped into that because he knew the one thing Jason Lloyd never brought up: the tape doesn't lie. While Jason was throwing around EPA and recycling insults like he doesn't know what he's looking at, Bush leaned on what any real football analyst relies on: the film. And what the film shows feels like a completely different quarterback than the one Jason tried to describe. Shedeur has strung together some of the most productive games from a Browns quarterback all season. Not for a rookie. Not for a fifth-rounder. Just period. He threw for over 360 yards and 3 touchdowns in one game, something no one else on this roster had done outside of Joe Flacco, who is literally old enough to be Shedeur's mentor. And let's not forget, in that same stretch, Shedeur also led the team in rushing for 3 straight weeks. That's not stat padding. That's playing survival ball and still producing. Even more impressive, he wasn't playing in garbage time or mopping up blowouts. He was keeping the Browns competitive in real games while dealing with collapsing pockets, missed assignments, and a supporting cast that hasn't exactly been elite. And through all of it, he stayed composed. Where the numbers tried to paint him as lost, the tape showed a quarterback diagnosing pressure, checking running back responsibilities, making pre-snap adjustments, and yes, flipping protections. Jason Lloyd said he doesn't know what he's looking at. But the game film begs to differ. You can watch Shedeur point out blitzers. You can literally see him shift blocking schemes. You can see it, not just in isolated moments, but repeatedly. This isn't a rookie purely surviving off instincts. This is a player who clearly understands the structure of what Kevin Stefanski's system requires. That fact alone dismantles most of Jason's argument, which is exactly why he avoided bringing it up. And that's what makes this whole meltdown so revealing. Jason came into his take armed with a single number that looked damning on the surface, but completely ignored everything that was happening in real time on film. He overlooked the production. He dismissed the decision-making. He skipped all acknowledgement of growth, all the things that actually matter when you evaluate a young quarterback. Instead of owning the full truth, he grabbed a single stat and used it like a club. The reality. When you watch Shedeur Sanders play, you don't see someone melting down or hopelessly lost. You see a young quarterback navigating chaos, sometimes smoothly, sometimes not, but always learning on the fly. You see him throwing into tight windows, refusing to check down when an opportunity's there to push the ball downfield. You see him scrambling when the protection breaks and creating off script. You see him taking hits and getting back up. You see flashes of franchise potential wrapped inside rookie mistakes, and that is exactly what should be expected. That's where the biggest disconnect lies. Shedeur's production, the yards, the touchdowns, the command, all backs up the story you see on the tape. And as Bush pointed out, if any other rookie in the league were putting that on film, they'd be celebrating it. They'd be saying, "This kid has tools, look how advanced he already is." But with Shedeur, it's not framed as development, it's framed as proof that he's not the guy. No wonder Bush got heated. He wasn't defending perfection. He was asking for consistency. He was saying, don't kill a rookie for performing like a rookie, especially when he's outproducing other guys who are still being talked about as future stars. Don't ignore 360-yard games. Don't ignore busted protection. Don't pretend like missing one read means he doesn't know football, when the tape shows that he does and has. And here's the truth Jason Lloyd ran from. Even the games where Shedeur struggles include high-level moments. Big throws on third down, key conversions, pocket awareness, the ability to extend plays. None of those show up in EPA, but they matter just as much and maybe more when you're evaluating someone's long-term ceiling. This is what happens when someone decides on a conclusion first, then bends every stat and sentence to fit the narrative. They stop watching the game. They stop being curious. They start defending a position instead of analyzing reality. That's what Jason Lloyd did. He didn't study. He didn't compare. He didn't watch close. He saw one area of struggle and declared it a death sentence. And when Garrett Bush laid out the on-field receipts, real production, real tape, real lessons learned under live NFL conditions, the whole foundation of Jason's argument evaporated. It didn't take a debate. It didn't take yelling. Just one person calmly asking, "Are you even watching the plays you're talking about?" And the answer was obvious. Because if you actually watch the plays, if you see the reads, the pressure adjustments, the QB center communication, if you study the ball placement and willingness to take a hit to make a play, you see a quarterback in progress. That matters. The fact that we even have to say this, more proof that the narrative around Shedeur Sanders was never built on tape. It was built on expectation, and when he didn't match the one certain analysts had pre-written, they tried to bury him with shaky data and blind confidence. But the tape doesn't lie. And when the truth is finally put next to the narrative, it usually becomes obvious who's watching the games and who is. The moment that segment ended, the internet lit up like wildfire. What started as a sports debate in one studio quickly turned into a spotlight moment that exposed how weak football analysis can look when there's no foundation behind it. And once the clips hit social media, people didn't hold back. Fans immediately started calling out the obvious. They weren't just criticizing Jason Lloyd's take. They were questioning how someone with insider status could walk onto a set with so little preparation and so much arrogant energy. The words exposed, cooked, and bias were all over the timeline within minutes. Garrett Bush didn't just clap back, he surgically dismantled the backbone of a narrative that some analysts had been pushing for weeks. The receipts started flying. Fans started pulling past takes from Jason Lloyd times where he made bold predictions that never came true, failed to own up to them, or pushed narratives he later walked back. One clip showed him hyping up failed Browns quarterbacks from years past. Another highlighted his silence when white rookie QBs struggled through worse stretches than Shedeur, with no character assassination, no hit pieces, and certainly no worst-of-all-time accusations. The credibility hit wasn't subtle. It was overwhelming. Because this wasn't just about one segment, it was about a pattern that finally got caught in broad daylight. And what made it worse was that Jason didn't try to clarify anything as the backlash built. No follow-up. No explanation of where his numbers came from. No acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the presentation lacked accountability. He stayed silent. Meanwhile, people were waiting for the one thing he used to prop up everything, the actual EPA data with full context. It never came. Critics online began breaking down the stat themselves. Analysts pointed out how EPA can be influenced by factors like field position, play calling tendencies, and surrounding talent. They explained how it fails to capture quarterback reads, pocket movement, or mental command, all areas where Shedeur has shown signs of growth. So, not only was the stat stripped of its power, it was deconstructed in real time by people far more informed than Lloyd managed to be on the show. And as the scrutiny intensified, something else started to happen. A shift. People who had previously ignored Shedeur's performances started looking back through game film. They rewatched his reads, his throws under pressure, his play extension moments. And just like that, the conversation Jason tried to control pivoted away from his take, straight back to the truth that lives on tape. That's the beautiful irony in how narratives collapse. A single segment meant to bury Shedeur actually spotlighted him. Viewers who saw just the ESPN scroll or headline got pulled into the real discussion. They watched the film. They engaged with real analysis. They began forming opinions rooted in evidence, not agenda. Meanwhile, media personalities weighed in too. Some backed Bush publicly. Others blasted Jason for being reckless with hyperbole and for falling into the worst trap a sports analyst can step into, needing the take to be right more than wanting the truth to come out. A few warned that this is exactly how media credibility dies, not with a massive scandal, but slowly, one dishonest stat at a time. This was a classic case of confidence without content. Jason Lloyd showed up armed with a conclusion, hoping no one would question his sources or challenge his numbers. When Garrett Bush did exactly that, it wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a gut check for sports media as a whole. Because if someone like Jason, who writes for a respected outlet, who has studio presence, who's been in the game for years, can fall this flat, how many others are doing the same thing and just haven't been called out yet? What Garrett Bush reminded everyone is that the audience isn't dumb. Fans are more informed than ever before. They watch all 22. They understand coverage shells. They read breakdown threads. So, when a high-profile analyst tries to slip one past them with a go-to stat and some vague name drops, the response isn't blind trust, it's screenshots, clips, and pushback. Instant accountability. And Jason Lloyd wasn't ready for it. The most compelling part of this fallout is what it means going forward, because it's no longer just about walking back a bad statement. Now people are watching Jason differently. They'll question future evaluations. They'll notice who he gives benefit of the doubt to and who he prejudges before the snap. His reputation didn't just take a hit, it entered a permanent review phase. Even worse for Jason. He got exposed by a coworker, someone who shares the same airtime and came in with more homework, more humility, and more heart. That kind of public check doesn't go away. The viewers saw it, the fans clipped it, and the internet never forgets. Shedeur never had to say a word. Because when the game tapes, teammates and cold numbers all speak louder than the haters, that silence becomes power. And Garrett Bush, he didn't just win a debate, he flipped the whole conversation. Now the focus isn't, is Shedeur the problem? It's, why is the media working so hard to make you think he is? That's the real fallout, and it's just getting started. What played out on that set wasn't just one guy getting publicly embarrassed. It was a blueprint, a real-time breakdown of how modern sports media manufactures narratives, and why the truth rarely gets a seat at the table unless somebody forces it in. Because here's the uncomfortable truth a lot of people don't want to admit. Most of today's sports coverage isn't about analysis, it's about storytelling. Controversy grabs more views, dramatic comparisons get more clicks, and hot takes, does the film say? Or, how does this compare to other rookies? Media personalities start with a conclusion and work backward. That's exactly what Jason Lloyd did. He didn't walk into that show to explore Shedeur Sanders' development as an NFL quarterback or to ask honest questions about what he's shown so far. He came in with a verdict already written. Then he reached for whatever would back it up. EPA stats with no context, anonymous voices with no accountability. He said, she said, noise dressed up like inside information. It wasn't analysis. It was a performance. A carefully important. He didn't just question the stat. He pulled the curtain back on the entire system. He exposed the mechanics of how analysis becomes bias. He showed people when it starts to shape public opinion around young athletes just trying to prove themselves. What Bush did was something sports media desperately needs more of: accountability. Facts, pushback, context. Because right now, there's an entire wing of sports commentary that survives on loud confidence and untraceable sources. And most of the time, nobody challenges them. That's how narratives become common knowledge. A quarterback gets labeled early bust diva, not a leader, not elite, and the media just runs with it. Every shaky throw becomes proof. Every win gets attributed to something else. And even when that player shows signs of growth, they don't get to outgrow that box. They're just stuck in it. That's Shedeur's situation right now. He's being measured against a bar no one else his age is held to. He's getting compared to 10-year flameouts while his day-to-day competition in the 2024 draft class skates by with grace and benefit of the doubt. That's not an accident. That's how agenda-driven media works. Because if the machine creates a strong enough narrative, it doesn't even need proof. All it takes is repetition, recycled quotes, stats without sources. Random comparisons that sound convincing if you don't stop to think. It's how players get buried before they have a chance to climb, how the public gets manipulated into thinking someone's failing when they're actually developing the way every young QB does. The problem is, it's all built on a fragile foundation. One good question, wrong. This moment was bigger than just Shedeur Sanders, bigger than just the Browns, and way bigger than Jason Lloyd. It was a turning point, a reminder that people are watching now. They care about transparency. They want breakdowns, not agendas, facts, not drama, and more importantly, they're not buying it anymore. The trust is gone. Audiences don't just take someone's word when they say, "I've got sources in the building." They ask who. They check past takes. They rewatch the game. They crowdsource analysis on YouTube and Twitter and Discord and piece together what's real from what's being sold. That's the new era, and it's exposing the old one fast. If anything, this segment should be taught as a case study. In 7 minutes, we saw how a narrative gets pushed, how it unravels when met with truth, and how a quiet, targeted smear campaign turns into a public media failure. The take was never the issue. The vehicle that brought it to air was the lack of context, the refusal to compare, the reliance on unnamed sources and cherry-picked numbers, and above all else, the confidence to stand on it as if the work had already been done. But the work hadn't been done. And when the right person came in and peeled back the layers, we didn't just see a bad take. We saw the whole system exposed for what it is. The better question now is Jason Lloyd wrong? That's already proven. The real question is, how many other voices in sports media are doing the exact same thing, and how long before they get exposed too? This wasn't a fluke moment. This was a shift. And if more people start showing up like Garrett Bush, prepared, unshaken, and unwilling to let the narrative write itself unchecked, the game might actually get back to what it was supposed to be about. Not clicks, not spin, football. Now that the noise has settled, let's be honest about what really happened here and why it matters way more than just one headline or one sports debate gone wrong. Jason Lloyd didn't just get called out. He got caught trying to turn a developing rookie quarterback into a finished bust story 5 games in. No real comparisons, no full context, just lazy data, aggressive confidence, and a storyline that sounded locked in before the mic was even turned on. And it almost worked. Because if Garrett Bush hadn't stepped in and demanded actual evidence, if he hadn't calmly but relentlessly asked, "Where are the facts?" that entire segment would have gone unchecked. Thousands of viewers would have walked away seeing Shedeur Sanders through a lens designed to discredit him from the jump. Another young athlete reduced to a narrative that had nothing to do with what's actually happening on the field. That's why this moment hit differently. It pulled the curtain back on a corner of sports media that doesn't care about truth, just traction, where hot takes carry more weight than honest breakdowns, where words like worst of all time get thrown around with zero accountability, where unnamed sources do the heavy lifting and advanced metrics are used like magic spells, never to be questioned, even if they're wildly out of place. But this time, the spell didn't land. This time, someone pushed back. And the reason that pushback mattered, the reason the audience responded so hard and so fast, is because deep down, people are tired of the game behind the game. They're tired of seeing certain players treated like projects and others treated like disappointments before they're even out of warm-ups. They're tired of watching the narrative curve itself based on personality, background, or marketability, instead of tape, production, or growth. Shedeur Sanders, whether analysts like it or not, has put real performances on film. He's shown poise in the face of pressure, made smart reads, ripped tight window throws, and shown leadership in a city that eats quarterbacks alive. And yes, he's made mistakes. All rookies do. But who else gets labeled a total failure after 5 starts when they're slinging 360-yard games and leading their team in rushing? The truth is, Shedeur doesn't need saviors. He doesn't need overly positive spin or protection from criticism. What he needs, what every young quarterback deserves, is honest evaluation, fair standards, a consistent measuring stick. And that's exactly what Jason Lloyd failed to bring to the table. Because this was never about just stats. It was about what happens when the stats don't match the agenda and the agenda gets exposed. This moment will stick because it wasn't about who yelled the loudest. It was about who came in with facts, context, and the courage to say, "This isn't right." Garrett Bush didn't flip the conversation by being flashy. He blew the doors open by asking the most simple question of all. If your take is true, show your work. And that's why this story isn't going away anytime soon. Because fans have realized something powerful, the story doesn't stop at the panel. Once the clip hits the timeline, once the receipts are out there, once the tape starts circulating, narratives don't get to hide anymore. They get tested. They get taken apart. And if they don't hold up, it's over for them, just like it was over for Jason. The tape, it held up. Shedeur, still standing, still growing, still producing. And the critics, scrambling. So what happens next? Maybe Jason Lloyd comes back with a new number. Maybe he name drops another source. Or maybe he pivots the argument entirely. Another data point, another QB comparison, another version of the same conclusion. That's usually what happens when the first story falls apart. But for everyone paying attention, for everyone watching from the outside, the damage is done. Credibility doesn't evaporate in one moment. It cracks, then it crumbles, then it disappears, piece by piece, while the audience slowly shifts their attention to people who aren't afraid of the whole truth. That's what this moment showed us. A narrative got pushed, a player got painted unfairly, and somebody finally stood up and said, "This doesn't add up." And in a media world full of copy-paste opinions, recycled takes, and no accountability, that might be the most valuable stat of all. If you're still watching, it means you care about real football storytelling, the kind that doesn't bend to headlines or hide behind spin. So if you're ready for more breakdowns, raw truth, and zero narrative fluff, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe. These stories matter, and we're just getting started. Because here, the stats don't get to lie. The sources don't get to stay anonymous, and the story never ends until the tape has the final word. This is Huddle Files, and you already know the truth lives here.